Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Pennyworth. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Actually, kind of picking up with the Melanie and Alfred situation. She thought that was interesting because that conversation actually kind of gave a little bit more light into kind of what's going through Alfred's mind. And for him, because she's like, oh, like, what do you like about me? He's like, I actually don't really know about you. But it's like anything about you. But she's like, well, you said you like something about me, so what is it? And for him, it's like, you don't love me. You don't have these dreams and wild expectations of like the life you'll have with me. And it kind of brings things like, okay, so for Alfred, it's a thing of he doesn't feel like he's a good person. Obviously, like everything he's ever done, the bad in his life, he always feels shameful about it. So for him, that's what makes him feel like, because he does care about Sandra and he doesn't want to be the bad guy. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. But for him, it's a thing of she's in love with me, but she shouldn't be, and has his dreams of like the great life that we'll have, maybe like family and stuff like that. It makes me wonder, did this same thing apply to Esme, or is it because of what happened to Esme and just everything else that subsequently followed that this only applies to Sandra? It actually it brings the whole Esme relationship into question too. Like maybe a lot of this applied to that. Like obviously he even says it later on, like he loves Sandra in his own way, but also when he was talking to Melanie, he was actually open about like obviously not being in love. Because like, you know, for Melanie, it's like, she's like, oh, well, who's to say I'm not in love with you? And it's like, yeah, but I'm not in love with you. But she's like, I'd like to know what it's like to actually kind of to love someone, kind of be loved in return, which even Alfred kind of agrees. So I think it's Sandra loves him, but for him, it's like he doesn't love her. He cares about her. But even later on, like I said, using the word specifically, you know, I love you too in my own way, because for him it's just how all he's been through. It's just, I think emotionally and on the inside, Alfred's pretty messed up, and I think that kind of makes it hard for him to really get close to people, because the people he's gotten close to, it just doesn't always work out. But also like, I'm not worth getting close to, you know. I think he looks at himself in a very negative light, whether it's just simply for the fact is that, hey, like all the terrible stuff I've done, I don't deserve that happily ever after. I'm not good enough for that, especially for someone like Sandra. He's made it clear in season 1. He constantly brings it up. He even tells her later on, like, oh, I told you from the beginning, I've always said that I was never good enough for you. But she was like, yeah, good thing I never listened to you, you know. So that was just kind of an interesting insight into, you know, Alfred's mind and everything, and just kind of where he stood, and even what Melanie was getting out of this. It was nice to kind of just, I think, be with someone that yet has their issues but never takes it out on her like the way Gilly does. Gilly's very controlling and powerful, and he, you know, hits her and treats her like garbage. It's like he treats her like she's his property to do whatever with, you know. So that was an interesting aspect to it, especially what that kind of, well, first and foremost, now he's got the money to leave and go to America. He brings it to Thomas. Even Thomas is like, hey, I figured you get some of the money. I figured you wouldn't have all of it. So I had a job lined up that I was like, I knew you'd be perfect for. But hey, you don't need the money. Job's still there. And he's like, nah, I'm never going to work for you. Ha. Ha ha ha. Which this episode also presents a lot of interesting things that I'm curious about. Like what this means for the continuity. Because obviously Martha and Thomas, I mean, once again, I'm not well versed in the comics, so to me, that's something that's never really been touched on a lot. It's always been dabbled in a little bit here and there. I think Gotham probably touched on it more than most canons typically do. But even then, like the relationship and everything, because spoilers, we find out that Martha was pregnant. Obviously, that information kind of got known because of DC fandom. Bruno Heller was talking about it, but what I think is interesting is they're not in a good place in their relationship when she finds out she's pregnant. It's like, oh, you two are just kind of at odds. So what does that mean for your relationship going forward? Does that mean things will get better? Because it's just like they're very fire and ice when it comes to them, you know? So it seems like Thomas kind of wants more of a relationship. She kind of maybe does, but at the same time, it's like all we've done is had sex 4 times. We had sex 4 times. That's not a relationship. So it's hard to say what each one of them really wants out of this at the end of the day. Like, I feel like Martha really does have a thing for Thomas, but she's probably trying to figure things out just like he is. Like, obviously, he's the rich boy that's always kind of gotten whatever he wants, you know, whether he'll say it or admit it or not. That's always kind of been it. And Martha's something someone that he wants, but it's like for her, she's so strong-willed to be like, no, I'm not just going to be another prize for you as a Wayne to get, it's like I make the decisions in this regard, so I think that plays a big part in it, and I think that lends itself to that adds layers to the fire and ice between them that they naturally already have, just who they are as people and just their differences and their kind of values and what they're willing to fight for, even die for in certain regards. It's really interesting in that regard. So the same thing with like Alfred saying the line, "Oh, I'd never work for you." Granted, they had their past of like, "Oh, yeah, I've done stuff for you in the past, and look where that's landed me." But I'm curious what that means going forward. Like, what's going to change things for Alfred, where he'll be like, "All right, Mr. Wayne, I'll work for you. I'll be," like what changed that? Like, it must be some stuff that further on goes in the Alfred story. I'm wondering, does it have something to do with his mom? Because his mom was like, "I want you to have a job that's not violent, no guns and stuff like that." To our knowledge, for what I know of Alfred, doesn't really do well. I think he does in Gotham. He goes hand to hand. He gets a little violent, but he never... I think there's moments he used guns, but I think on a traditional basis, it's like, I'm just here. I've got my training to protect this family, protect Bruce, my pseudo-son, So that's also another thing, because his mom later on is like, "Oh, I want grandchildren," which I'm like, I don't know if he typically has kids in the comic books or not. Most iterations of Alfred I've seen, at least it's never come up, at least to my recollection, with some of the animated stuff. I feel like Batwoman is the first continuity I've ever heard of him. Obviously, he has a daughter named Julia in that. I don't know if that's ever come up in any continuity that I'm aware of, like that I've experienced firsthand. So, like, not unless she exists and she was just never referenced or talked about. But that could just simply be like, oh, that's like a Batwoman specific thing. Like, maybe that's not a traditional Batman canon thing, but it might just be for Batwoman. It might be something they did specifically for that continuity. Regardless, I just thought that was kind of interesting. But, Alfred's got his money locked and loaded. Obviously, he breaks things off with Sandra. And once again, he doesn't want to be the bad guy. He does, because he already feels like he's enough of a bad guy. So it's like, I think it's probably an extra layer of like he wanted to put it off, because despite like, hey, having this person who loves you, I think it feels good to probably have someone look at you. Well, it probably comes with its pros and cons of, hey, here's someone that looks at you in a positive light. They see you in the best light. And it's like, you don't see yourself in the best light, so you're like, oh, that person, you don't like that they look at you in that good light. But I think it's also nice for someone to kind of see you in a nice light, because you don't see yourself in a nice light. So I think there's a little bit of a conundrum in that regard. And obviously Sandra tries to make, it's like, oh no, it's okay. I appreciate you being honest. It's better than you just disappearing and me never knowing what happened to you. Hell, him even paying her off is worse, because it's almost like, oh, like you're making it seem like it was a transaction. She didn't take the money, she left it. But for him, it's like, to kind of make up. Like, once again, he's just trying to ease it. But if he really wanted to do right by her, he would have never been in that relationship, because it was pretty clear how she felt about him, but he was so caught up in his own stuff, like trying to fill that void. It was kind of a rebound thing where it's like she was obviously Sandra's had a thing for Alfie for a while since season 1, but he never really gave her much notice, except for that one time like they shagged, and it was kind of like, yeah, she was kind of like, oh, Alfie, but he was kind of ignoring her, which she was kind of like, oh, fuck you, towards that. So it's complicated and interesting. Obviously her dad kind of like wallops Alfred later on, and it's kind of like, yeah, he deserved it for what he did, but also it's just like, okay, so there's that. Aziz forcing his hand in this episode. Obviously it's like, oh, the queen showed up. She's like, oh, there's no need to be scared. He's like, not scared. Surprise. And for her it being like, it's like, oh, you've been kind of ignoring me. He's like, no, just because you're too good for me. She's like, of course I am. But then later on she's like, oh, I'm just taking a piss out of you. So it's like, oh, okay, I'm here for business. And I love the whole conversation about like, it's like, oh yeah, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to be here for a while. And Aziz is like, oh yeah, because you're going to go to America. And then Alfred's like, what the fuck? Does everyone know what my plans are? Because obviously Thomas already knew. Well, he went to Thomas, but who knows if Thomas already knew ahead of time about his plans to go to America. But it's like, does every bloody bastard know like my whole plans? It's like, yeah, sadly it seems like it. But Aziz kind of forced his hand by being like, oh, we know about this woman you're being with. Which I wonder, does the queen take that as a little bit of a slight? Like, yeah, they had their thing, and maybe that's her being a little possessive, just kind of screwing it to him. I mean, she's also the queen, so she can kind of do whatever she wants. But I wonder, is there some slight spite of just kind of like, oh, you never got back to me? Like, even suggesting, jokingly, but maybe also kind of serious, I could actually have you hung for the fact is that you're not listening to your queen type of thing, like, you know. But Aziz is willing to throw Melanie under the bus because it's like, how do they know? It's like, well, kind of don't worry about how we know, but they've been keeping an eye on Alfred. Who knows? Because Thomas, this was the original job, was the whole Lucius Fox thing. That was what Thomas was going to hook Alfred up with that job. So who's to say Thomas didn't already kind of have that dirt on Alfred to blackmail him? But it could have been something Aziz was like, yeah, I'm just looking for this opportunity to throw it. Like, I figured that something later on down the grapevine would need me to use this against you. Which even he's like, yeah, I feel scummy about it, but we need this done. So yeah. Because for you don't care about what rumors spread about you, especially because you already broken things off with Sandra. Word get back to her, that would probably hurt even more, but that's one thing. But it's like, oh, if Melanie gets found out by Gully, considering the sociopath that he is, it's like, that's not good. Even to the point that Alfred calls her up, it's like, okay, we've been kind of found out, so has he been acting weird? And it's just like, no. It's like, don't take the chance. Get the hell out of here. Don't wait to leave. Leave now, because there's no telling whether he really knows or not. I think he does, or at least has some idea. It's just, you know, because even Dave Boyd talks about it later on, like, oh yeah, like, oh, it's about Melanie, right? And he was like, how did you know? It's like, dude, half the people in this bar know about you two. I mean, to be fair, you stuck off together, and it's like, you're not as secretive as you think you are. It's like, man, everyone knows Alfie's business, whether it's the Melanie thing, whether it's him going to America. It's like, you have no secrets in town right now, bro. So they reluctantly have to take the job. Obviously, even Dave Boyd being like, oh, well, you know, if Baza was here, what he would say. But obviously, it's the whole thing of, well, Baza isn't here. And they're both just kind of leaning on a bar like, damn, like, it hits them again, reminder. Because, like, once again, Baza was kind of the angel on both of their shoulders. He kind of acted as the mediator to kind of stop them from going to Buckwild. He kind of, you know, he balanced out this trifecta that is that trio. So he balanced them out. Without him, they're a little off kilter, you know. So they end up meeting up with Martha. Martha's asking all these questions about well, at least saying like, oh, I know you guys are, how are you guys? They're like, we're fine. And she keeps bringing up Baza, and it's just like, even Alfred being like, she's like, oh, you look like shit. And he was like, well, you look great. See, told you she'd start. And Dave Boy was like, yeah, straight for the throat. She's like, no, I care about you guys, and I just don't want you to blame yourselves about Baza. But for them, it's like, you don't bring up dead comrades when you're on an operation. It's extremely bad luck. Okay, but still, you guys shouldn't blame yourself about it. And it's like, okay. So obviously for Alfred, it's like, all right, I want to handle this clean and quick. We get Lucius, we bounce. Nobody has to die. They don't want to cause stuff. They don't want to stir up stuff. So when it's time, like, Alfred's like, all right, let's just put this all aside. But the dude is like, yeah, I kind of have no family. So like, whatever, like, it's my job. So I have no family to speak of. So it's not a thing of I have a family to get back to. So Alfred's just kind of looking like, well, damn. You know, but in that moment turns into a shootout, which I love. Once again, Dave Boy walks away with a gunshot. I'm like, why the hell is it every time we turn around, Dave Boy is literally the one that walks away hurt? Which I think makes the Baza thing even more sad, because Baza walked away dead. It severely hurt, whereas, you know, Dave Boy is usually the one that gets shot or stabbed. He always walks, granted, this wasn't too bad, but I'm like, still, there's got to be a running gag, because the guy who probably looks for death the most ends up inadvertently escaping it, I think. But eventually, like, time is going to run out, and when the time comes, he is going to die. I just get the feeling, whether it's at the end of this season or not, I don't think Dave Boy's going to survive, just because he is someone that is kind of actively searching for death, whether he'll admit it or not. Like, definitely in season 1 he was. This season, I still feel like it. Obviously, he's just trying to drink himself into a stupor. A lot of demons, a lot of dark stuff from the past that they're dealing with, that they don't really have anyone else to really talk to about what they experienced and what they went through, that those demons and those ghosts still haunt them, you know. So especially in Dave Boy's case, you know, obviously Alfred, we haven't dived into it as much as season 1. Obviously, like, the Spanish thing, like, Spanish kept like popping up in his dreams and his hallucinations because he was blaming himself about the Esme thing. So obviously Alfred internalizes a lot of regrets about how a lot of stuff went down, especially what went down at the restaurant. Like, at the end, he had to shoot them, had to shoot the people outside. Granted, the one dude is dead, the one they were talking to, and then, like, the other 2 were, like, injured, plus he had to kill the other 2 on the outside. So for him, he's pissed. Like, as they're driving away, he's like, damn it, why do you have to do that? It's like, you know, it pissed him off, but it's like, he didn't want things to go that way. The job is successful, but he didn't want more death on his hand. And that's actually what makes him kind of explode at the end when Dave Boy's busting his chops about everything. He was like, I'm tired of everyone blaming me for everything. Like, not everything's my fault. I'm just trying to make a life for myself, and just everything just goes to shit. Like, you kind of feel bad for Alfred. Yeah, like, I've talked about it. Like, he tries to do the right thing, at least on certain regards. Like, he's kind of in a position where he'll kind of do whatever for his sake, but it's also like for the people around him he cares about. Like, he's trying to get out of London, not just for his sake, but also his mom's sake. It's like, there's so much destruction and death here. We have to leave. I have to get my mom out of here because I love her so much. Trying to get his boy. He was trying to get Bazza and Dave Boy because like, these are my boys. I got to get them out of here too. It's just like nothing's working out, and he gets vilified for being the bad guy, for doing asshole-ish things. But it's like, I'm trying to make a life for myself like any other person. It's just life sucker punches me any chance it gets, But him having that sit down with his mom, and for her, she's like, the one solace she has is, yes, like, trouble's been following you most of your life. He's like, I'm trying. She's like, but you're not trying hard enough. But my only solace is that you do regret a lot of things that you made. It's not like you like yourself after. It's not like, oh, you're chipper and okay. It's like, you regret the way a lot of things played out. Like, yeah, he did what he needed to. He's like, oh, this money can get us to America. Like he brought that up last episode, but he didn't want things to go down that way. That's why he didn't pull the trigger, but Gully's dude did, so. But his mom is like, all right, your dad would want me to look after you, but I can't do that if you're thousands of miles away in America, so I'll go with you. Which I'm like, I don't think his mom's going to make it. I hope she does. I hope. But I get the feeling like she's going to get taken away from him. Like, I think at the end of it all, what's going to push Alfred even more to go to America to work for Thomas and everything is like he might not have anything. I think the promise to his mom of like trying to find something that's not violent, no guns and stuff like that, working with Thomas is probably the closest thing. Like, of like he probably made a promise that might be something we're foreshadowing. Like when he eventually does work for Thomas, it's like, just promise me it's not going to be a job without violence, without guns. Because that was his whole thing from the beginning. Like, he wanted to be done away with violence, and yet he, like, every time he turns around, there's a new job, new circumstances that call for him to lock and load, So, for that to kind of come back full circle, and I think it will come back even more full circle in that regard when it ultimately comes to him working as a butler for Thomas. I think that's why he was like, oh, I'm not going to be security, I'm going to be, where they started off as kind of a security thing. He's a security firm and everything. I think it's more so going to be, that's why he takes the position as a butler, because he's like, I can help and protect without being a killer and stuff like that, which I think that in itself might be why Bruce kind of ultimately, I mean, granted, it's because of the League of Shadows or Assassins, depending on what titling you want to go by, that it's because of that, but also Alfred's kind of his moral compass in that regard. So I think that's kind of an interesting element of why Bruce could potentially be like, why he's got the no-kill rule and stuff like that, because it might not just be his own personal code, it might be a code that Alfred ultimately instills upon him, I had brought it up earlier, but there is a whole situation with Martha. Like, she's talking to Patricia about like, oh, so when you're going to tell him that you're pregnant? She's like, what? How do you know? She's like, oh yeah, you got that glow about you, plus you've been farting a lot, plus your boobs are immaculate. So yeah, it's like, do you want to know what the sex of the child is? And she's like, no. He's like, all right, go ahead and surprise yourself. But it's like, moment you tell Thomas, he's going to freak out. She's like, I know, that's why I'm not going to tell him, especially considering where they currently stand in when it comes to their relationship. So that's definitely going to be interesting on that front. Another angle to this is the whole Thomas and Lucius thing, because Lucius gives all the information about Stormcloud and everything, which I guess this is the precursor to the fear toxin, in the sense of like maybe Scarecrow's dad, which I'm only basing this because of Gotham. I don't know if this is typically how it works, but either Scarecrow himself or Scarecrow's dad ultimately is going to get the fear toxin from all the stuff that's going down here. Because of Stormcloud. Like, I don't know whether Salt is ultimately going to end up being like Scarecrow's dad or something like that, and that's the correlation in that regard. Because I'm blanking on Scarecrow's real name. Scarecrow's name is Jonathan Crane. I barely could remember Crane, but I could never remember his first name, Jonathan. So that's why I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if they're like maybe in this continuity, maybe like he leaves London or whatever and changes his name and becomes like Crane instead of Salt, because I think Salt's first name is John, isn't it? So maybe there could be some correlation there. Once again, I'm probably reading too much into stuff, but it's just interesting that he's using a toxin that literally people get scared to death, and I'm like, yeah, that's the precursor to like the fear toxin Scarecrow's. Like, you know, maybe Scarecrow modifies it, or maybe Salt eventually modifies it, and either Jonathan's father gets his hand on it, or Jonathan himself, or like I said, Jonathan might end up being Salt's son. Who knows? But the conversation between Lucius and Thomas was interesting, because I was wondering if they already knew each other, but it's like, no, this is actually the first time meeting. They heard a little bit about each other. He knows only a little bit about Thomas, just because of him being a Wayne and everything, but it's like, other than that, I don't really know anything. But for him, it's like, I helped, some of the tests done by Stormcloud, so he's seen it firsthand what it's capable of. So it's like, we need to run this up the chain. The president can't let this happen. But Thomas was like, no, there's generals that are in place that would never let Harwood use this, so all we can do is pass on the data and red flag it. But for him, it's like, no, that's not good enough. Like, this could kill so many people. He's like, we have to stop it. If the CIA and the government won't do anything about it, then I'll do it. And it's like, well, what will you do? He's like, as the CIA station chief, the question is, what will you do? And that's the thing. That's been the biggest part. Like, obviously, Martha's whole thing of, like, how much of what you do is... Because Aziz even brought it up early in the episode. It's like, oh, come on, Martha. Like, not all of his choices of how the CIA operates things is his personal feelings. He's been brought into all of this. So, his opinions are not the CIA's opinions and feelings about certain things aren't a necessary reflection of his own. It's just kind of isn't, it kind of isn't thing. But it begs the question: what will Thomas do if the time comes for it? Because that was also a conversation too. Like, obviously they're backing the Raven Union, but it's like, as Thomas said, like, no, we're backing the winners. It's like, yeah, but they'll go off and conquer other places like Scotland. They'll do their whole thing, but it's like, what are you going to do about it? And that's the question. Will Thomas go against the U.S. government, the CIA, when they ultimately decide we're not going to do that? Even though this eventually could lead to a threat. But I think it's like the U.S., at least the CIA, thinking like, we have enough power and resources. They want to do stuff over there. Sure, we get to kind of tip the scales into the direction we want them to. And if they try to come after us, we'll take them down. We have the power, the might, and everything to take them down if necessary. So that might be kind of the mentality on that front. Another angle to this episode I thought was really interesting, that kind of took me by surprise, was the whole Aziz asking for Thomas's help. It's like, Thomas is like, well, obviously I can help you out with a favor. He's like, oh, I was hoping you'd do that. Yeah, so basically I want you to tell Crowley, because he'll most likely listen to these words if they come from you, that John Ripper is trying to come after him. Okay, and it's like, even Martha's like, what are you trying to do? It's like, well, John's trying to take my position as Prime Minister. So, and then we see that thing later on. He's drawing like a pentagram, I think would be the word, probably not. And he had like tapes a dead fly to him. I'm like, what is that? And then later on we see like, oh, he set that whole thing up, making Alistair think that John was coming after him, but making John also think that Alistair comes after him, so that John will be forced to make a move, and then Alistair, the Crowley will respond in kind, thinking, not realizing that your boy Aziz set that all in motion. Like, he can be very cutthroat. I mean, we've seen that before, but we've seen like how his machinations at work, like him orchestrating that, even obviously, and that was trippy. Like, John was in that forest. He's like, okay, you're trying to scare me with your occult crap, Crowley, and he tried to run away, but he finds himself back to the grave, and then he sees himself crawling out the grave again, and then he sees the Queen and Aziz, and it's like, what's up? And it's like, oh, he's been hit with the toxin. So it's like, oh, so Crowley has access to it too, because that's what he used. I mean, I guess they just used the same components of whatever is at the heart of the fear toxin. Either that's in Stormcloud, and Crowley was just able to get his hands on it, or whatever the case may be. It seemed like he got stuck in like a fear trance, and the Queen is like, oh, what's happening to him? And Aziz is like, oh man, he must be stressed, job is stressful. And then leans in and is like, I want you to know I did this to you. And it's like, wow, you cheeky, smug bastard. Holy, like I said, we've seen Aziz kind of willing to do whatever. Granted, you don't feel as bad because it's not like John's a good guy, but it also shows you, like, obviously they played at the beginning the whole thing of like how, you have Aziz making that whole statement about love and their humanity, and kind of, I mean, granted, he didn't kill John. That if John had his way, it would have been a situation of Aziz, if Aziz was kind of going down the more John Ripper route, it was like, I would have killed you. But it's like me breaking your mind, leaving you in terror, and also gloating that, hey, it's me. Like, it still fits in line, but it's also like, that's kind of a dickish way to handle that. So it's not the most like humane, but I guess it's like there's humaneness in the approach rather than straight up killing him and getting rid of him. Because this way you can validify it by being like, he's kind of crazy, so no one should back him up, which is interesting because that flows into the whole situation with Harwood, because once again, that he had that soldier coming to Salt by being like, hey, we need to talk on Miss Gaunt's part because there's no way she was a traitor. Like, he's like, my family and her family go back. Like, she comes from a really well-off family, a well-standing family. Even like, I think he said like a cousin of mine is married to her cousin or something like that. So their family's connected in that regard. So it's like, Salt, you lay the groundwork, I come in and we convince Harwood no. But then you have Salt manipulating the situation like, you want to offer me this position? I can't accept it. You want to hire, this higher position? Well, there's some rumors in dissent. There's people around. I think that Miss Gaunt wasn't alone. It's like, yeah. Like, there's no way, like, Gaunt would just do whatever she done alone. Like, someone else manipulate her into this. So it's like, I figured as much. The pills had to be something, but even more so now because it's like, these are new pills. They're a little different, different color. And it's like, okay, so maybe the pills they may pertain like a weaker version of Stormcloud on a lower level, that it probably feeds into the fear and paranoia. So maybe that's what he's actually poisoning him with. But it's like, once again, I still wasn't 100% sure what Salt plans on getting from this, because like I said, he seems like he's the one that just wants to do his research and stuff like that. But I guess if he's in a powerful enough position, like maybe he just wants the power and recognition. But I assumed it was just so he could be closer to Harwood so that he can convince Harwood to use Stormcloud, because obviously his generals are still reluctant about it as well. So either he's going to slowly dismantle the hierarchy to make it so that he's the only one in charge, but I guess with this new promotion he got from Harwood, it does put him in charge. So it's like, hey, you kind of have to listen to me. Granted, the generals aren't going to, so I don't know what his game is. It's, at first I thought it was just getting Gaunt out of the way so he could be the one whispering in Harwood's ear, but it turns out no, his plan was to also get rid of Harwood, not unless that was a byproduct of his plan. Because obviously, because of the paranoia and believing like, Salt, you're the only one I can believe and trust in, we're going to root out these traitors. Because he was like, whoever comes to you about Miss Gaunt, they definitely got to be the traitor, no matter how much they want to try and make it seem like they're on your side. The soldier came to him and he's like, you're part of this conspiracy. And obviously he just seems crazy, which they even said this line I thought was interesting. I was like, I think someone referenced him being mad at like a Hatter. And I was like, which we know that's a Batman villain, the Hatter. I don't know. I doubt that's where they're potentially setting him up to be. Like, Harwood's thing is probably just his own thing. Like, there's probably not going to be a lot of direct correlation between some of the some people and villains set up in this, with the exceptions of obviously Thomas, Martha, and Lucius. They're going to be the only direct connections to like Batman, or Bruce/Batman, but we don't know if anything else from here, especially considering the time frame, will necessarily directly connect to. Because once again, Bruce Heller said there will be Batman references. If you're in the know, you'll know. If you don't know, they'll just kind of like sweep past you. So I don't know. It might be some stuff on that level. But regardless, Harwood looks like an insane man as he beat that dude down. Was bashing his head in, stomping on him with using his cane and everything. It was like, that was brutal. And to every like ranking member there, he looks nuts. Even the general coming in like, what the hell did you do? It's like, you're part of the conspiracy too. So he gets locked away, get that smug smile from Salt. So it's like, okay, still don't get how this all benefits you. Yeah, I get the feeling you're going to be able to do Stormcloud, but I guess it's also like you will be able to reign supreme and just make, like I said, maybe it's not just Stormcloud, maybe it's the power and position you want. Now they're just power hungry in that regard. Maybe be in this position. Like, part of me wonders, like, could he be a plant? Like, did someone specifically, maybe not necessarily, I'm not saying like league-wise, I mean, that could be a possibility, but I'm wondering, did someone else send him there to kind of unravel the society that maybe he, because part of me, like, if you want to get, like, super conspiratorial about, like, something that's not, I doubt they'd go down this lane. you don't think it's like a situation where he was brought in by like the League of Assassins or Shadows. Like their whole thing is about kind of like basically turning the world upside down. They basically are the reason why kingdoms and nations and cities fall. It's the League. So I'm wondering, could they be like secretly, could Salt work for them, be one of their like from the League of Shadows / Assassins? Like, could he be someone from that league, and could he be there to dismantle this whole thing? So that's why he's trying to work his way up, so he can basically break everything, like destroy everything. Maybe that's the reason why this toxin's a thing in the first place. Once again, like I said, super out there conspiracy theory tinfoil hat thing. Like, obviously there's no real thread to that necessarily, but it was just something I was wondering, like, could that, because it just seemed like he's in a destructive, like, once again, maybe, like I say, it could just simply be personal gain, but I just feel like the way he's going about this, like, is it really just about Stormcloud? It feels like it has to be so much more. Hopefully we'll get answers to that soon enough. I'm really interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.